Cool, Ramin. Excited to have you here and to learn a little bit more about your work. Would love if you could start out just tell me what are you up to? What are you working on? And how did you get into the type of work you're doing right now?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. Great to see you. And let's see, maybe I'll couch it in my career started in early stage startups, social entrepreneurship, really with a lens of innovation. And I was fortunate to work with a lot of folks from, peer entrepreneurs to funders that really took a systemic lens. And some, you just to ground that, like I worked in local food systems. We were asking how could we uh, change the nature of the food system so small to medium sized farms went from 1% to 10%. We thought that would be transformative. Now, as I went from my 20s into my 30s, if you ask the question of what systems needed the most disruption or, positive evolution, it just felt clearer and clearer that those were our systems of governance. On one hand, I think Larry Lessig's observations back in the early 2000s that we had lowercase c corruption felt spot on. Just the cost of running for office meant folks weren't beholden, elected folks weren't beholden to everyday people. And then two, our ecological crisis just in my backyard. I live in California. We had major wildfires. We all knew climate challenges would be a part of our generation's experience here, but I didn't think it'd be happening so fast in such profound ways that left me feeling like, our democracy isn't set up to really grapple with this sort of complex issue well. Let's take that on. Let's ask what could the future of democracy look like that upgrades the system across the board. No, so that led to starting a nonprofit. That's not a business, nor should it be, in my view. I guess there are some civic businesses here, but I didn't think that could be well explored through a business. And that's the American Public Trust. And the premise is to bring some of these innovations emerging at the edges to life here in the US. And some of them are, again, emerging in the US. It's not like it's all bringing things in, but bringing things from the edges to the center. Let's stand up demonstrations of what's possible in new paradigms of democracy. Uh, Principally, our work has been with cities and counties, on occasion, some states. And that's everything from what we might call citizen assemblies or civic assemblies to some of the civic tech stuff, using everything from Polis, if folks are familiar with that platform, to AI these days as an ally. And, that's a healthy tension there too. But to really bring everyday people's voice and wisdom more to the center of how we make choices and move forward.
That's great. I want to get into all of that. Let's start with the citizen assembly or civic assembly work. Love if you can, I mean, talk a little bit about what it is. I feel like this is a an idea that's getting more traction right now. Would be curious, like why you think it's getting more traction right now, um, and what some of the work that you're engaging on in a U.S. context is looking like as it pertains to citizen or civic assemblies.
Yeah, and I mean, for the why, maybe I'll even start. I'm reminded of the essay you wrote back in November, kind of reflecting on the reckoning for the pro democracy movement. And I think at the root of that is this feeling that, our system of democracy hasn't been delivering for everyday people for a while. That people's voice doesn't matter, that in the end, it's like it's beholden to special interests one way or another. And then you've got gerrymandering, as another expression of that. So I think part of what is fueling assemblies is this sense that, well, this is a really effective way of giving everyday people a seat at the table on complex issues. You're also giving people enough time to grapple with that complexity. So, it's like the opposite of a town hall where you've got 2 minutes on the hot mic and you're fighting for your soundbite to be heard. This lets a group of everyday folks from that community, representing all walks of life, spend on average of a minimum of 30 to 40 hours together, right? They hear from folks on all sides. And sometimes, actually, oftentimes, we hear from city council members, other legislatures, that this is what their role feels like, right? They're sitting in that complex set of trade-offs in a way that folks at town halls don't have a chance to. What you get out the other side is as important. It's super majority levels of agreement on how to move forward on this issue. So it can unlock the, the stuckness, the polarization, the log jams on our toughest issues, and also restores faith, not just for the folks in the room, but there have been studies that show the positive ripple effects. Just knowing it happened in the community means that other everyday residents have a sense of greater voice and agency as just community members, as citizens. So there's a lot to celebrate about what that innovation on its own offers. They have their trade-offs too. They're relatively expensive. I think the ROI is very clear, but they cost money and they take time. So I think it's like the Mercedes Benz or whatever metaphor we want. It's a powerful tool. It should be used on our toughest issues. But if we frame it as collaborative governance, there's a whole other set of tools that are more accessible in between as well.
So I want to, that's the Mercedes Benz of collaborative governance and that type. I want to get more into the other tools, but let's stick with civic assemblies for a second. Just from a practical perspective, because I can see there's almost an intellectual exercise here of what do we mean by democracy? Is it representative democracy? Is this a form of direct democracy? And to that end, how do local governments choose the issues to focus on? And how do they decide this is something we want citizen input on rather than the representative elected officials that were ostensibly elected to make decisions?
Yeah, and I think most elected officials are apt to use this innovation initially on an issue that is really polarized and stuck, where they're kind of boxed in by the stakeholder dynamics. And for what it's worth, they actually don't know where the silent majority would net out on the issue, right? They know the polarized voices, but it's totally unclear where the public is at. We can use the example from Fort Collins that happened recently. It was a land use question. Land tends to actually create polarized factions pretty quickly. 165 acres, city owned, and they principally heard from, I would say, two of the most organized, loudest groups. One said, hey, preserve it exactly as it is. We want it to be natural space, open space. The other most organized group had a vision of using at least some of the land as a bike park. What's notable is most of the public discussion alternated between, let's say, these polarized views, and they just ran an assembly. They commissioned the assembly on the issue. And what came out the other side was a collaborative consensus for a multi-use vision. A third of it preserved as natural space, a mountain bike park, a raptor center slash wildlife recovery center, and then maybe most surprisingly, given how small this is as a percentage of the population, the indigenous community is 0.5%. 90% agreement that one way or another indigenous uses should be prioritized, including ceremonial uses and otherwise. So that wasn't even in the forefront of the conversation previously, and now council is moving forward trying to advance these priorities. So to go back full circle, this was a kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't issue. And I think from housing to homelessness to policing and public safety, again, I live in San Francisco. I can echo these dynamics in the way many of those issues have been stuck here. It builds a parade electeds can stand in front of and manage complex stakeholder dynamics.
So let's go. Let me come back to civic assemblies, but you mentioned that it is the Mercedes Benz of collaborative governance. What can collaborative governance look like writ large? I feel like one of the pushbacks that I hear about civic assemblies, which it seems like you understand to some extent, is it's not the most scalable thing in the world. It's expensive, et cetera. So let's start by thinking about like what are other models? What could this look like in other places in ways that might be a little bit more accessible to folks?
Well, first, let me start with the genre of deliberative mini publics. I'll use the academic term, and citizen assemblies are the most popular version of that. Now, it's worth noting that there are flavors of deliberative mini publics that use a smaller number of folks, more like 20 to 24 folks, and are running 2.5 day processes. So we're talking a long weekend. They take roughly about half as much time to organize. And again, if you're accomplishing it in a weekend, this has mostly been used in a state in Austria, but they've been doing it for 15 years. It's been award winning. It's grappled with tough issues like immigration and asylum, with the Syrian refugee crisis, et cetera, et cetera. And it demonstrates that you can, all right, you're not going to be generating policy specific recommendations, but you can still unlock the values based kind of zero sum conflict. And we could go into this, the asylum and refugee example to demonstrate that if helpful. But all right, so there's shorter form, still potent mini publics that I don't think there's enough engagement with in the field writ large, including internationally and in particular in the US. Then the other end of the spectrum is what we can think of as just better public engagement that's digitally enabled. Polis is the most commonly cited tool that delivers that. Taiwan, Audrey Tang, the first digital minister there. And what's the distinction between a polis and a poll? Well, baseline, what it is doing that's similar to an assembly is helping identify where there's already areas of consensus that are heretofore invisible, So it maps the opinion landscape. It's not that absolute numbers matter as much as identifying the areas of surprising agreement. So on one hand, we've even seen this in some of the piloting at the state of California. Well, really, this pilot with the state is focused on the wildfire recovery efforts in LA. So we did an initial round. It wasn't with Polis, but similar type experience on agenda setting. What matters in the recovery from Angelino's perspective?
Oh, I appreciate it. I mean, it seems like it's a little bit of like, we need to demonstrate that some of this stuff can work, but there's also almost like a more whole scale transformation that can happen too, which is like transforming how people experience democracy and having more of a deliberative approach. I'm curious how that resonates because I see a little bit of like, okay, civic assemblies, yes, collaborative governments, yes, thinking about polling differently, yes, but some of this is about like reimagining how people experience democracy in their everyday lives. Is that fair?
Totally, yeah. And could you imagine a future where you've got a civic dashboard of some sort where you open up and there are a range of opportunities to add your voice in? And sure, maybe on occasion you end up getting the winning lottery ticket for a deeper deliberative experience, but on average you've got um, opportunities kind of at your speed that meet your life where it's at, and that implies a feedback loop where there's some accountability. And that can be micro feedback loops where the consensus outcomes that came out of a given engagement include an audit trail where your vote, your voices, you can see how it fit into that consensus. And then, you could log in 3 months later to see what the response was from the governing authority, what actions have been taken. It's that sort of transparency that I would love to be part of a system that had that, because it's not like any one moment. These are policy cycles; they keep iterating. Um, and yeah, maybe was I picking up on what you're
Yeah,
pointing
yeah,
to
yeah,
there?
yeah. That makes sense. So another question, just to hone in on too. Sometimes, I mean, the pro-democracy community writ large, but these types of interventions can be seen as elitist, more on the left side, et cetera, more on the progressive side. And so, how are you thinking about making sure that these types of participatory interventions are seen as something that appeal to a wide array of Americans, neither at the top or from a specific political spectrum?
That's not it's not my experience that these innovations are seen as elitist. In fact, it's interesting. There's polling data from Pew. I was just digging up back from 2021. It was the same poll that showed that something like 65% of Americans, and I think this was reflecting more on the national government, felt that major change needed to happen in the way we did democracy. Um, and then at the same time, there was polling about citizen assemblies. And between folks that thought it was a very good idea to a somewhat good idea, and again, they defined what a citizen assembly is. I don't expect average Americans have heard of the concept, but based on that definition, 78% of people supported it. And that was not breaking down between party lines or any other aspect. So this premise of, hey, should everyday people be making informed recommendations on the tough issues that are going to impact our lives? I don't think that's an elitist position. In fact, for what it's worth, in my experience, there are a lot of people that come from more elite institutions that have doubt that everyday people can actually do this sort of grappling well and generate useful outcomes. So yeah, so I'd say the hurdle is more with the elites, you know, yeah. So now though the risk is that it falls in the polarized divides, and I think that work is about being thoughtful to stand this up and to be developing champions across the political spectrum, across the ideological spectrum, from rural to urban, you know, and for what it's worth, we've found folks that are electeds, high-ranking civil servants that are excited about this, that are Republicans, that are Democrats, that are non-affiliated, that are independent in between, because they mostly read it as a better way of solving tough problems. And again, this is easier to do at the local level because you've got a whole bunch of issues that the polarized dynamics aren't about left and right. It's more like issue-based local polarization, and we can sidestep a lot of the bigger dysfunction of the time.
I appreciate that point on elites being the problem here. You've talked about having a hard time getting more pilots out there, getting people to really care about, I don't know if it's care about this, but to take this seriously. Um, why do you think that's the case? I'd be curious if you can talk about sort of the pro-democracy community and how you've been trying to make inroads within the pro-democracy community so that this is seen as something that's a little bit more of a tractable, effective intervention.
Well, this is more my like processing sense making out loud. I mean, I think there are a few things. One, pro democracy broadly in the last few cycles, I think has over indexed on an idea that preventing Trump from taking office is the best way to champion pro democracy, and an overemphasis on just stuff that matters. Let's just say the defend bucket of our basic electoral democracy, voter rights, et cetera, et cetera. And there hasn't been as much ambition and investment in actually shoring up the foundations of the broken system, building a democracy that people could have faith in. So that's a mindset, I think, shift that's been a little bit more conservative there. Because again, coming from the startup world, which is a lot of early stage funding for things that are effectively in R&D, my suspicion or hope was that there would be more philanthropic foundation capital that had that mindset than there has been in practice. The other piece is, hey, if you focus on the government commission cases, it's basically a long sales cycle, right? So it's a complex political system that you're selling into. Even if you've got a champion that's a city council member or a city manager, you've got to enroll, let's say, a majority of council members if you want it to be commissioned. Oftentimes the mayor is quite important depending on the model of government there. And that has to coincide with the right political issue at the right time. Because kind of as we were describing, these take about 9 months to deliver the kind of the gold standards that we largely focus on, the citizen assemblies. That's a lot of developing, keeping the pot warm, and then waiting for the right moment. There hasn't been a recognition of that, I think, and there's a lot of aspiration for philanthropy to put money into things that are already shovel ready without acknowledging that. So broadly speaking, in the real world, you'd expect some amount of money that is supporting like a conscious, thoughtful business development project, going through the ICMAs, what is it? I forget all the professional networks, effectively, of mayors and council members. We haven't seen that level of commitment or interest yet. The other piece is, well, I think the digital tools are a huge opportunity space that maybe there's increasing attention on. And then the intersections, and I'll speak personally, where I'm interested now, hey, keep doing the government commission work, yes, and we need to start looking at how we can potentially use some of these digital tools to do agenda setting with civil society actors. Could we imagine a scenario where, pick Bowling Green, Kentucky, you've got a polis survey out there that has a snowball dynamic, and you get enough voice from the public that you've now changed the political context on the types of issues that can be taken on in a deeper way. And you're already creating wins and momentum that makes the next assembly easier, that makes, frankly, this move into collaborative governance easier. I'm curious about that innovation space.
What, given everything going on, um, what are you most excited about? If this, I mean, given some of the work happening on the ground, uh, where are you excited in terms of the work that you're doing and where this might be able to get traction for, we call it the collaborative governance space. What are you most excited about?
What comes to mind is at least two buckets. One is, again, continuing to work with forward-thinking elected officials that are, that see the leadership that this time needs is leadership that actually stands behind the informed voice of the people. So the opportunity to do this, and whether it's a Houston or a Denver or in Utah or any other number of cities and counties and states where there's seed work that's been going in place for months, if not years, is exciting. And you sense that ripeness, and you sense more electeds that are like, they get it. They we're waiting for the right moment, the right issue. Um, on the other hand, is working more with civil society actors in, you could call it, if we've been talking about collaborative governance, what does collaborative organizing look like that transcends usual issue or identity divides and is similarly surfacing this kind of shared agenda that can be a powerful starting point. So that's not meant to be at odds with government, but as a positive, mandate and context that can also help government allies be bolder in the things that they're standing for. So that would be looking more at the digital tools first. Not to diminish in any way the power of getting together in person, but looking at digital tools as a way of giving that sort of, coalition building a superpower that is new. And again, I do want to underscore there are ways of using AI as an ally in this deep listening that have really only come online in the last 12 months. I've got an essay
Hmm.
published about that soon. Again, not to undermine the challenges with AI. So yeah, those frontiers feel very rich amidst this all. I think if this stuff just looks like incremental add-ons to status quo, whatever liberal democracy that we've had the last 3 decades, no one's going to care, So like figuring out how we can actually have a bolder voice that, again, on one level is honest about acknowledging the problems, because that's what some other actors have been able to do, and then say, hey, we've got the answer. We have to start by acknowledging the problems, and then offering democratic solutions. So that's an area where, frankly, I'd love to have more allies to be envisioning how we can do that better together. Because otherwise, we're preaching to the choir and having lovely Zoom calls amongst a very small community, and not really reaching the public. And let's say, I don't know if it's building a movement or building a bigger tent, but that feels really missing.
So part of the point there being like this can't just be seen as like widgets to improve things, but almost a different like philosophical underpinning of how to actually engage in democracy.
Yeah, I think that's a good reflection. Yeah, I think we have to be willing to say that. And in fact, in the essay that I wrote up, I called it a new kind of democracy. You know, so, and that we should test that out. Like frankly, we should have the budget to go sit down with folks across the country and the spectrum to see if that lands. If we offered a new kind of democracy and this was the story behind it,